The desert had a way of keeping its secrets, but it also had a cruel habit of exposing them at the most unexpected times. Heat shimmered on the horizon like restless spirits, rising in wavering columns that blurred the boundary between earth and sky. The Apache warrior, known among his people as Taza, sat on horseback at the edge of a dusty trail, his hawk-like eyes scanning the valley below. He had been following the wagon tracks since dawn, his instinct whispering that fate was pulling him somewhere he had not planned to go. Taza was no stranger to hardship. His face bore the lines of battles fought and losses endured, each scar telling a story of survival against enemies both seen and unseen. He had buried comrades, family, and even fragments of himself along the long, unforgiving path of life. Yet nothing prepared him for what he saw when the wagon came into view. A small group of settlers was making camp near a cluster of mesquite trees. Their wagon pulled to a stop while the horses drank greedily from a narrow stream. Children's laughter carried faintly on the dry wind. It was a sound Taza rarely heard among his own people anymore. Innocence seemed like a luxury in a world defined by conflict. But it was not the children's laughter that gripped his chest. It was one boy in particular. The child was about 12, lean and wiry, with sun-darkened skin that marked him as one who played freely under the desert sun. He wore simple settlers' clothes, but there was something unmistakable in the way he moved, in the sharpness of his gaze, in the slope of his shoulders. Something familiar, something that pulled at Taza's memory like a half-forgotten dream. The boy turned suddenly, chasing after a rabbit that darted between the sagebrush. For a fleeting moment, the sunlight struck his face directly, and Taza's breath caught in his throat. The child's cheekbones, the strong jaw, the intensity burning in his eyes. It was as if he were staring into a mirror of his own youth. A whisper escaped his lips before he could stop it, rough and low, carried away almost instantly by the wind. The boy. Is he my son? The words shocked even him. He had not spoken them as a conscious thought, but as an involuntary cry from some hidden place deep within. He had spent years burying the past, pushing away memories that could only bring pain. Yet here, in the middle of the desert, fate had brought a living reminder to stand before him. His horse shifted uneasily beneath him, sensing his turmoil. Taza gripped the reins tightly, forcing himself to remain still. He could not reveal himself, not yet. His people had long taught him that patience was a warrior's greatest weapon. Still, his heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing like a drum of war. The boy called out to someone near the wagon, his voice light and unbroken. A woman emerged from the canvas shade, dusting her hands on her apron. Taza felt as though the world itself tilted beneath him when he saw her face. Clara. It had been more than a decade since he last saw her. In another lifetime, before blood feuds and the bitter line drawn between settler and Apache, Clara had been his secret solace. Nights beneath the stars, hushed whispers of dreams, promises made in the soft glow of a fire, memories he had locked away because they had no place in the life he was forced to live. Yet here she was, standing no more than a few hundred paces away, and beside her, the boy who looked so much like him. Taza's throat tightened, a storm raging inside. The desert wind tugged at his braids, carrying with it the scent of mesquite and sage, but he smelled something else too, something more piercing than smoke or gunpowder. It was the scent of truth, raw and undeniable. For the first time in years, the seasoned warrior felt vulnerable, as though stripped of every shield he had built around his heart. He had walked into countless battles with unwavering resolve, but here, in the presence of a boy who might carry his blood, he felt uncertain, exposed. The encounter had been chance, or perhaps destiny. Whichever it was, Taza knew one thing for certain: his life was no longer his own. Taza lingered on the ridge above the settlers' camp, hidden by the low brush and the bend of the canyon wall. He had always trusted silence, for silence was the Apache's greatest companion, It cloaked him from enemies, concealed his thoughts from allies, and allowed him to hear the world's secrets when others were too busy speaking. But tonight, silence betrayed him. The whisper had slipped past his lips before he could catch it. "The boy, is he my son?" It was not a question he intended for the wind to carry, and yet the words hung heavy in the air, pressing against his chest like a brand. He shook his head, angry with himself. Warriors were not meant to show doubt, and certainly not to surrender to emotions that could cloud judgment. But this was no ordinary doubt. This was a wound that had suddenly reopened after years of scarring. The boy, his boy, was still chasing the rabbit, darting between sage and cactus, laughing freely, unconcerned with the struggles of nations and bloodlines. The Apache watched every movement, the tilt of the head, the firm stride, the way his eyes lit up when he focused on his prey. It was all too familiar. Taza pressed a calloused hand to his face. Memories he had buried came back unbidden. Clara's face, glowing in the firelight as she whispered promises in broken Apache, her accent rough, but her intent sincere. The softness of her hand on his, the quiet hope they had shared despite the chasm between their people. He had once thought he could bridge that chasm. He had been wrong, war had come, blood had been spilled, and Clara had vanished with it, taken back to her own people. He had convinced himself that what they shared was gone, lost to time and grief. He told himself she had likely forgotten him, perhaps even hated him. He had done the same in return, burying her name deep in the dust of memory. And yet here she was, alive, standing at a wagon, with a boy who looked like his reflection cast back through years. "No," Taza muttered harshly under his breath. "It cannot be." But even as he denied it, his heart throbbed with a rhythm he could not silence. The boy's face, his face, would not leave him. The doubt whispered louder the longer he watched. Each time the boy turned, each smile, each movement, it was as though the land itself mocked him with evidence. His whisper had grown into a question too large to contain, and the more he tried to dismiss it, the more it returned like an echo in a canyon, refusing to fade. "The boy, is he my son?" The thought burned. If it were true, then all these years he had been denied something more precious than life itself, his bloodline, his legacy. In Apache tradition, sons carried not only the names of their fathers, but also their spirit. A man was not truly gone as long as his son bore his strength forward. And if this boy was truly his, then part of him had survived, hidden away beyond his reach. But the same thought brought fear. If it were true, what then? What life could a boy born of two worlds live? Would he belong anywhere? Or would he always be torn, unwanted by both? Taza knew well the cruelty of men, and he would not wish that fate on any child, least of all his own. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. Clara called the boy back to the wagon, her voice firm but tender. The boy obeyed, bounding to her side, his small hand slipping into hers. Taza's breath hitched at the sight. The tenderness of that gesture, the way the boy looked at her with trust, made the doubt inside him ache even more. If the boy truly was his, Clara had kept him hidden all these years. Why? Out of fear, out of shame, or perhaps out of love, to protect the child from a life divided? The questions clawed at Taza, each sharper than the last. The warrior closed his eyes and lowered his head. For a long moment he sat in silence, his horse shifting beneath him, waiting. Finally he breathed out a single word, a vow more than a thought. "I will know the truth." The desert gave no answer. Only the whisper of wind and the cry of a distant hawk accompanied him. But deep inside, Taza felt the stirrings of something he had not allowed himself in many years, hope, dangerous and fragile, like a flame flickering in the dark. Clara stepped down from the wagon with the careful grace of someone accustomed to travel, her skirts brushing against the dust, her face drawn with weariness, yet softened by the glow of evening light. Time had etched faint lines along her cheeks, but to Taza's eyes, hidden among the rocks above, she was unchanged in the ways that mattered. Her presence hit him like a thunderclap, awakening memories he had thought buried beneath years of struggle and war. He remembered her laughter first, how it once rang like water spilling over stone, bright and alive. He remembered the way her golden hair had caught the firelight when she leaned close to whisper his name. And he remembered the night they had parted. Her eyes filled with fear, torn between loyalty to her people and the love they had shared in secret. That final look had haunted him through battles and winters alike. He had told himself she was gone forever. Now, as the desert evening wrapped her in its glow, she was here again, real and undeniable. She called softly to the boy, her son, there. Son? Beckoning him closer. He ran to her side, his face glowing with joy as he pressed against her. She smoothed his hair with a tender hand, her eyes filled with the quiet pride only a mother could carry. It was in that moment, watching her with the boy, that Taza's heart twisted with both longing and rage. Clara had lived these years raising the child while he, the father, had lived in ignorance. Still hidden, Taza clenched his fists, the calluses on his palms digging into his skin. He wanted to ride down, to confront her, to demand the truth he felt burning in his chest, yet he remained frozen, his warrior's discipline holding him back. Rushing would gain him nothing. He needed to see more, to be sure. Clara glanced around. The camp, her eyes sharp, cautious. She had not lost that habit. She had always been wary of shadows, of dangers hidden just beyond the firelight. Once, she had confessed to him that fear lived in her since childhood, a fear of being caught between worlds, and here she was again, glancing into the distance as though she sensed eyes upon her. For a fleeting instant, Taza thought her gaze drifted near the ridge where he watched, and his breath stilled. But she turned away, shaking off the moment, returning her attention to the boy. She knelt, speaking to him in low tones. Though Taza could not hear the words, he read her expression. Easily, love, warning, guidance. She was shaping him, teaching him, just as any parent would. But the sight pierced Taza's heart. That should have been him. He should have been there to guide the boy's hand with a bow, to teach him the trails of the desert and the voices of the wind. Instead, Clara had carried that duty alone, and the boy had grown without knowing the man who had given him life. The weight of it struck Taza suddenly. Clara had not forgotten him. She could not have, not with the boy standing there as proof of their bond. Every day she had looked upon that child, she must have remembered him. Every time the boy smiled with eyes so much like his own, she must have thought of the warrior she had once loved. And yet, she had kept the truth hidden, shielding the boy from the knowledge of his father. 100 questions burned in Taza's mind. Had she hidden the child out of shame? Had she told herself that keeping him away from the Apache was mercy? Or had she protected him from the hatred that would have fallen on a boy born of two worlds? Clara rose and led the boy back toward the wagon, the fading sun setting fire to her hair. Taza felt the years collapse between them, every choice, every lost moment pressing down upon him. She was here, flesh and blood, not a dream. The woman he had once held close, the woman who had vanished from his life, had returned. And with her return, the past he had tried to bury stirred once more, demanding to be reckoned with. Taza whispered to himself, voice low and steady, as if daring the desert to deny him. Clara, why have you come back? The wind offered no answer. Only the steady thrum of his heartbeat told him that her return was not chance, but destiny calling him into a reckoning long overdue. The desert has a way of remembering even when men try to forget. Every gust of wind, every shifting grain of sand seemed to whisper memories Taza had forced himself to bury. As he watched Clara move about the camp, those memories stirred like embers long thought extinguished, flaring into flame once more. He remembered the first time he had seen her, years ago, before blood divided them beyond repair. She had been younger then, barely more than a girl, her dress torn at the hem from walking too far in shoes not meant for the desert. Her family's wagon had broken on the stony trail near the river, and she had wandered off, frightened and alone. He had found her crouched beneath a mesquite tree, clutching a small cross at her neck. She had looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, expecting the worst. But instead of fearsome warrior or enemy savage, she had seen only a man, equally surprised to find her there. He remembered how she had whispered, "Please," her voice trembling, though she had not asked for anything more. And in that instant, something had softened in him. He guided her back to the trail, back to her kin, disappearing before anyone could see. That was how it began. Secret glances, stolen moments on the edge of two worlds that despised one another. At first, it was accidental. Then it was deliberate. She sought him out near the river at dusk, when the sun's last fire turned the sky into a tapestry of blood and gold. She would bring him bread, sometimes fruit from her father's orchard. In return, he taught her the language of the land, the names of stars, the tracks of animals, the whispers of the wind in the canyons. Taza could still hear her laughter when she tried to mimic his words in Apache. Her tongue stumbled, but her eyes glowed with determination. She wanted to understand, to be part of his world, and he, though he had never admitted it aloud, longed for hers. But theirs was a dangerous love. He had known it from the first. Each meeting carried the risk of discovery, the risk of betrayal. If her family knew, they would call her dishonored. If his people knew, they would call him a fool. Yet neither of them could stop. He remembered one night in particular, the one that would forever bind them. The fire between them had burned as hot as the summer air, the sky above scattered with 1,000 stars. She had leaned into him, whispering his name in a voice that trembled with fear and longing all at once. Taza. Just his name. But it had been enough. They had crossed a line that night, a line from which there was no return. For a season, he believed they could withstand the storm. They dreamed of a life beyond hatred, where their child, yes, she had spoken of children even then, might walk freely between both worlds. But the world around them was not merciful. Whispers grew. A settler had seen Clara slipping away at dusk. An Apache scout had spotted her near the river. Rumors spread like wildfire, and with them came suspicion and anger. When war finally flared between their people, there was no room for tenderness. Clara was taken back east with her kin, and Taza, torn between loyalty to his blood and love for her, was left behind. He had waited for her. For weeks he searched the riverbanks, hoping to see her return. He had carved their secret mark into a cottonwood tree where they once met, a silent promise that he would never forget. But she never came back. Only silence filled the canyon where her laughter had once lived. Taza had told himself she was gone forever, whether by choice, by force, or by fate. He had hardened his heart, burying her memory beneath the weight of war. And now, here she was, standing by a wagon with a boy who bore his face. The unspoken history pressed against his chest like a blade. It explained everything and nothing all at once. She had not forgotten him. She had carried a piece of him with her all these years. But why had she hidden it? Why had she not come back to the river, not left a sign, not whispered a word? His heart thundered as he gripped the reins tighter. The past had returned, and with it, questions that could no longer remain unspoken. The boy darted through the desert scrub with the boundless energy of youth, his laughter ringing against the canyon walls like the call of a bird too free to be caught. The rabbit he chased zigzagged through the sagebrush, nimble and clever, but the boy pursued with the reckless determination of one who had not yet learned how quickly life could turn against you. Taza, still hidden in the shadows of the ridge, watched him with unblinking eyes. Every motion of the boy's body, the stretch of his legs, the instinctive way his arms balanced, the sudden crouch when he thought he might pounce, echoed movements Taza himself had made as a child. It was as if he were staring into his own past, seeing himself reborn in another time. The recognition was a knife, cutting deep. The boy stumbled on a loose stone, landing hard in the dust. But instead of tears, laughter spilled from him again, raw and unbroken. He rose, brushed himself off with quick, careless sweeps of his hands, and continued the chase as though nothing could deter him. Taza felt a pang in his chest. That resilience, that refusal to admit defeat, was not learned from books or sermons. That was blood. When at last the rabbit vanished into a thicket too dense to follow, the boy gave a disappointed sigh, but quickly forgot the failure. He wandered back toward the stream, kneeling to scoop water into his hands, drinking greedily. He paused then, staring at his reflection rippling in the surface. For a moment he seemed still, quiet, studying himself as though searching for something he could not name. Then he splashed the water with both hands, breaking the reflection into 1,000 fragments, and laughed again. The innocence in that laughter struck Taza hardest of all. The boy knew nothing of the divisions that had shaped his parents' lives. He did not know of blood feuds, of broken promises, of love forbidden by the world around it. His world was simple: chase the rabbit, drink from the stream, return to the comfort of his mother's arms. It was a world without suspicion, without sorrow, without the burden of legacy. Clara called to him then, her voice carrying lightly over the camp. "Samuel," she said, and the name seemed to freeze Taza in place. Samuel. The sound of it was foreign and heavy. A settler's name. A name that belonged to the world that had stolen Clara from him. Hearing it on her lips was like hearing the finality of years spoken aloud. Samuel. Not a name from his people, not one he would have given. A name meant to hide the boy's other half. The boy, Samuel, lifted his head, grinning, and sprinted toward her. His hair caught the glow of the setting sun, gleaming like fire. He leapt into her embrace, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she bent to kiss the top of his head. Taza's throat constricted. The boy's innocence was a shield, but it was also a curse. He did not know the truth of who he was, of where he came from. He did not know that half his blood sang the songs of warriors, that his father's people had walked these deserts for generations before wagons ever touched the land. The boy had been raised only in the world of his mother, a world that would never speak the name Taza in kindness. And yet, perhaps that innocence was also a gift. Samuel's laughter was unbroken, his smile unburdened. He looked at Clara with trust that could not be tarnished. He played without fear. He lived without shame. Taza felt the weight of choice pressing on him. To reveal himself would shatter that innocence. The boy would no longer be just Samuel, the settler's son. He would become something else. Something caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. And what right did Taza have to place such a burden upon him? Still, as he watched Samuel rest his head against Clara's shoulder, Taza knew the boy's innocence could not last forever. The truth lived in the sharp lines of his face, in the mirrored fire of his eyes. One day, whether by Taza's hand or by the whispers of others, the boy would learn who he was, and when that day came, innocence would give way to destiny. When Samuel had finally settled beside the wagon, content with a crust of bread and the company of his mother, Clara allowed herself a moment of stillness. She sat on the worn wooden step, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the boys. face as he ate with the single-mindedness only children possessed. He smiled up at her between bites, crumbs scattering on his chin, and her heart swelled, then broke, as it always did when she let herself think too long. For 12 years she had carried this secret, shielding it as fiercely as a mother shields a child from a storm. She had never spoken the truth aloud, not even to herself in the dead of night. But the truth lived in Samuel's eyes, in the curve of his cheekbones, in the way his spirit burned with a fire she knew did not come from her. It came from him, from Taza. Her throat tightened as she remembered the night she had fled. The world had been aflame with anger, settlers and Apache alike ready to draw blood. She had been given no choice. Her family had pulled her away, her father's hand like iron on her arm. She had wanted to scream, to tell them of the life that was already growing within her, but fear silenced her. What would they have done if they had known? What would the world have done to a child born of two enemies? So she had hidden her love, hidden her son, hidden her tears. In the quiet of the nights after Samuel's birth, she had wept into her pillow, muffling her sobs so the others in the house would not hear. She wept for Taza, who did not know he had a son. She wept for Samuel, who would grow up never knowing his father's touch, his voice, his strength. She wept for herself, trapped forever between duty and desire, love and loyalty. Even now, so many years later, the tears still came when she least expected them. Tonight, as the desert sunset bathed the land in gold and crimson, she felt her eyes sting. She turned her face away so Samuel would not notice. He was too young to carry her burdens. He deserved his laughter, his innocence. But Clara knew it could not last. The older Samuel grew, the more questions he asked. Already he had wondered why his skin was darker than the other children's, why his hair did not curl like his cousins, why strangers sometimes stared too long. She had answered gently, evasively, but one day her words would not be enough. One day he would demand the truth. And when that day came, would she have the courage to tell him? Or would she betray Taza once more by burying his name in silence? Her heart twisted as she glanced toward the horizon. Sometimes when the wind shifted just right, she swore she could feel him near, like a shadow watching from the cliffs. Foolish, she told herself. He would never forgive her. And yet deep inside, she longed to see him again, not for herself, but for Samuel. Every child deserved to know where he came from. Every boy deserved the strength of a father's hand upon his shoulder. The tears slipped free before she could stop them, hot against her cheeks. She brushed them away quickly, forcing a smile when Samuel looked up at her with wide, questioning eyes. "What's wrong, Mama?" he asked softly. "Nothing, my love," she whispered, stroking his hair. Nothing at all. But inside she was breaking. Every day the secret grew heavier, pressing against her ribs, threatening to consume her. She knew that fate was circling closer, that the truth could not be hidden forever. And when it came, when the past rose from the dust of the desert to stand before her, she feared her tears would no longer be enough to hide the storm in her heart. Night had settled over the desert, cool and wide, a canopy of stars spread across the heavens. The campfires of the settlers flickered like small beacons against the dark, their smoke curling into the sky. Samuel had long since fallen asleep, his small body curled beneath a wool blanket at the base of the wagon. Clara sat nearby, staring into the flames, her hands trembling in her lap. She had felt the weight of eyes all day, eyes she knew too well. Taza. She had sensed him. Not seen, not heard, but sensed. The way the air shifted, the way the night seemed to hold its breath, the way her own heart thudded in her chest, as though it recognized a rhythm it had once known. She had told herself for years that he was gone from her life forever. Yet here, tonight, in the silence of the desert, She felt his presence stronger than any memory. When at last he appeared, stepping from the shadows with the silent grace of a hunter, Clara gasped. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the flood of memories that overtook her at the sight of him. His braids caught the firelight. His eyes burned with the same fire they always had. But his face was heavier now, carved with the weight of years and battles. Taza, she whispered, the name breaking from her lips like a prayer and a wound all at once. He said nothing at first, only studied her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the unspoken words of a decade. At last, his voice came, low and rough. "The boy," he said. "Is he mine?" The words struck her like an arrow. She looked instinctively toward Samuel, who stirred in his sleep but did not wake. Her throat tightened. She had imagined this moment countless times in the quiet of her nights. But now that it was here, she found herself unprepared. Taza stepped closer, his eyes piercing. "Do not lie to me, Clara. I see him. I see myself in him. Tell me the truth." Her hands clenched in her lap until her nails bit into her palms. The tears came before the words, blurring her vision. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, he is yours." The confession hung in the air, fragile and final. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Taza closed his eyes, his jaw tight, as though the truth was both a victory and a torment. When he opened them again, anger and grief burned together. "All these years," he said, "you kept him from me, my blood, my son." Clara's tears spilled freely now. She rose to her feet, trembling, her voice rising, in desperation. "What choice did I have? My family would have never let me keep him if they knew. Your people would have despised him. The world would have torn him apart. I did what I had to do to protect him. By denying him his father?" Taza's voice was harsh, but beneath it, Clara heard the wound, the pain that lay deeper than rage. "I denied you," she admitted, her sobs breaking through. "And I will live with that guilt until my last breath. But I would not let him grow up hunted, hated, caught between two worlds. I wanted him safe. I wanted him happy." She pressed her hands to her face, choking back her tears. "And every day I thought of you. Every day, Taza. Don't think I didn't." The warrior's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. He wanted to hate her for what she had done, for stealing 12 years from him. But looking at her now, broken and weeping, he could not summon hate. Only sorrow. At last, Clara lowered her hands, her eyes glistening. "He is your son," she whispered. "Yours and mine. I kept the truth from you, but I can't anymore. Not now." The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. The truth had been spoken, and there was no turning back. Taza stood by the fire, silent after Clara's confession. The flames lit his face, showing lines carved by years of war and loss. His chest rose with heavy breaths, as though he had been struck in battle. A son. His son. The words tore at him, each one heavier than the last. For 12 years the boy had lived without knowing him. For 12 years he had been robbed of the right to guide, to teach, to protect. Rage swelled, hot and sharp, but beneath it came sorrow so deep it nearly brought him to his knees. He turned from Clara, his gaze falling on the sleeping boy. Samuel's chest rose and fell with the easy rhythm of childhood. He was at peace, untouched by the storm that now raged around him. Taza's fists clenched. That peace had been bought with his absence. "You should have told me," Taza said at last. His voice was low but unshaken. Clara stepped closer. "If I had, he might not be alive. Do you understand? They would have taken him from me, or worse. I could not risk it. Her words stung. He wanted to shout, to demand why she had not trusted him, why she had not come back. But he swallowed the urge. He knew the dangers she spoke of. He had seen children caught between worlds, mocked, rejected, abandoned. Samuel had been spared that fate, at least until now. Still, the wound of betrayal burned. Taza's mind filled with images of what might have been. A boy riding at his side, learning the ways of the bow, listening to the stories of his people. Instead, those years were gone, stolen by silence. He dropped to one knee, running a hand over the earth as though grounding himself. "He should have known me," he whispered. Clara's voice softened. "And now he can. He's here. You're here. We cannot change the past, Taza. But maybe we can give him a future." Her words settled in him like water on dry ground. He wanted to resist, to cling to his anger. Yet as he watched Samuel stir in his sleep, he felt the truth press against his heart. The boy was not just a reminder of what was lost. He was a reason to keep moving forward. Taza rose slowly, his decision forming like steel being forged. "He will know me," he said. The words were not a wish but a vow. Clara looked at him, searching his face. "And if he rejects you? If the world rejects him?" Taza's eyes narrowed. "Then I will stand with him, always." For the first time that night, Clara allowed herself to breathe deeply. Yet tears still clung to her lashes. "I feared this moment for so long, but now that it's here, I don't know what frightens me more, that he will not accept you, or that he will." Taza glanced at her, then back to the boy. "He deserves the truth. Whatever follows, he will not face it alone." He stepped back into the shadows, his mind sharp, his resolve set. The anger remained, the sorrow too, but they no longer ruled him. They had become fuel. His son lived, and that was enough. Tonight, he would not wake the boy. Tonight, Samuel would sleep in innocence one last time. Tomorrow, everything would change. The desert night lay heavy and still. A coyote's distant cry drifted across the canyon, answered only by silence. Clara had fallen quiet, her hands wrapped around herself as though she could hold back the storm that had already broken. Taza stood apart, his shadow tall against the firelight, his eyes fixed on the boy who lay sleeping. But innocence is a fragile thing, and it rarely lasts until morning. Samuel stirred. His small body shifted under the blanket, and his eyes blinked, open, adjusting to the flicker of the flames. For a moment he looked dazed, lost between dream and waking. Then he saw the figure near the fire, the tall man with braids, eyes dark as midnight, face stern and unreadable. Samuel sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. "Mama," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. Clara startled, her heart leaping into her throat. She moved quickly to his side, kneeling beside him, brushing his hair back. "It's all right, Samuel. Go back to sleep." But the boy's eyes were fixed on Taza. He tilted his head, curious rather than afraid. "Who is he?" The question pierced the silence like an arrow. Clara froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had lived 12 years dreading this moment, rehearsing 100 different explanations, only to find herself struck dumb when the time arrived. Taza stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, as though approaching a skittish animal. His gaze remained locked on the boy, but his heart pounded like a drum. He could face enemies in battle without hesitation, but here before this child, his legs felt heavy, his throat tight. Samuel looked between them, puzzled by the tension in the air. "Mama, who is he?" he repeated, his voice stronger this time. Clara swallowed hard. The firelight danced across her face, revealing the sheen of fresh tears. She reached for Samuel's hand, gripping it tightly as though she could shield him from the truth even now. "He is someone I once knew," she whispered. Samuel frowned, unsatisfied with the answer. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, returned to Taza. The resemblance was undeniable. Eyes the same shape and depth, the same line of the jaw, the same quiet fire smoldering beneath the surface. The boy was beginning to see it, though he could not yet name it. Taza lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself level with Samuel. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied the boy's face as if trying to memorize it. At last his voice came, low and steady. "I am someone who should have been here all along." The words made Clara's breath catch. Samuel's brow furrowed. He looked to his mother for clarity, but she only wept silently, her shoulders trembling. The boy turned back to the stranger. "Why are you here now?" Taza hesitated. The truth burned in him, fierce and undeniable. But it was Clara who finally found her voice, though it quavered with every word. "Because you have a right to know," she said softly. She cupped Samuel's cheek, her thumb brushing away a fleck of dirt. "You asked who he is. He is more than a friend, more than someone I once knew." Samuel's eyes widened, confusion and dawning realization warring on his young face. "Then, who?" Clara drew a breath, steadying herself. She looked at Taza, then back at the boy. Her lips trembled as she spoke the words she had feared. "For so long, he is your father." The air seemed to still. Samuel stared at her, then at Taza, his mouth opening but no sound escaping. He searched their faces, seeking proof, seeking denial, seeking something solid to stand on. At last, his voice came, quiet and small, but sharp enough to cut both their hearts. "My father?" The question hung in the firelit night, trembling. Between hope and fear, innocence and truth. And for the first time, Taza felt the boy's gaze not as curiosity, but as recognition. For a long moment no one moved. The fire crackled softly, throwing shadows that danced along the canvas of the wagon. Samuel's question, "My father?" hung in the stillness like smoke that refused to drift away. Clara's breath caught. She held her son's hand tighter, as if afraid he might pull away from her. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, not only for the past she could not undo, but for the fragile present that was unfolding before her. Taza's heart thundered. He had faced rifles leveled at his chest, cavalry charging down the slopes, and the hunger of winters that stole children from their mothers. Yet never had he known fear like this, fear that the boy before him might turn from him, deny him, reject him. His son, his blood. He lowered himself fully onto both knees, his tall frame folding until his eyes met Samuel's. The boy's face was open, searching, unsure. "Yes," Taza said, his voice deep but trembling with something he could not hide. "I am your father." The words broke something in Clara. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed openly now, the dam of years giving way. Samuel blinked, his young mind racing to stitch this truth into the fabric of everything he thought. He knew. But why weren't you? His questions stumbled over one another, his breath quickening. Clara pulled him close, trying to soothe him, but Samuel pushed gently against her embrace. His eyes were locked on Taza. "Where have you been?" The question struck like a blade. Taza bowed his head. "I was kept from you. I did not know you lived, not until now. If I had known..." His voice faltered, then steadied with raw honesty. "If I had known, I would have been here. I would never have let you grow without me. Samuel's lower lip quivered. He looked. Between his mother's tear-streaked face and the stranger, no, not stranger, the man who claimed him. "Mama!" Clara wiped her eyes, forcing herself to meet her son's gaze. "He speaks the truth, Samuel. I should have told you. I should have told him. But I was afraid. Afraid of what the world would do to you, to him, to us." Her voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting you." The boy's brow furrowed, his innocence colliding with the enormity of the moment. Then, with a child's directness, he asked the only question that mattered. "Do you love me?" Taza's throat tightened. He reached out, his hand trembling as it hovered in the air. "More than my own life," he said, the words raw and unshaken. "Though I was not here, my blood has walked with you every step. My spirit has waited for you every day. You are my son." Something broke then, something heavy and invisible. Samuel leaned forward, hesitantly at first, then with sudden urgency, throwing himself into Taza's chest. His small arms wrapped tight around the warrior's neck. Taza gasped, the boy's warmth sinking into him, washing away 12 years of emptiness in an instant. His arms closed around Samuel, strong but gentle, as though he held the most fragile treasure in the world. His eyes burned, and for the first time in many years, tears fell freely down his weathered cheeks. Clara watched, her own sobs quieter now, her heart torn open by grief and relief alike. She had feared this moment for so long, but seeing it, her son in his father's arms, was like watching a wound begin to heal. Samuel's voice was muffled against Taza's shoulder. "You're real," he whispered. "Yes," Taza murmured, pressing his cheek against the boy's hair. "I am real, and I will never leave you again." The desert night seemed to hold them then, the stars bearing witness as father and son, embraced for the first time. There were no trumpets, no thunder, no grand declarations. Only tears, only hearts breaking and mending in the same breath. And though the future remained uncertain, though the world outside would not welcome a boy, of two bloods easily, hope stirred in the firelight. For in that moment, Taza was no longer just a warrior hardened by loss. He was a father. And Samuel, no longer just a boy chasing rabbits through the dust, was a son who had found his place in the arms of the man who claimed him. The past could not be undone. The years could not be reclaimed. But as tears fell and hearts knit together, one truth shone brighter than all the rest. The bond between father and son had been restored, and nothing would ever break it again.